everyone, it's Judy. Welcome back to the OnTrack podcast. Today we talk with Lawrence Romine, who's the VP of Corporate Marketing here at Altium. He'll talk about what new features you can expect in Altium Designer 20, which will be coming out later this year. So lean in, enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to Altium's OnTrack podcast, where we talk to leaders about PCB design, tackling subjects ranging from schematic capture all the way to the manufacturing floor. I'm your host, Judy Warner. Please listen in every week and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast apps. And be sure to check out the show notes at altium.com/podcast, where you can find great resources and multiple ways to connect with us on social media. Well, Lawrence, welcome back to the OnTrack podcast. For those who may have not seen you here, why don't you take a moment to tell us about your history and role here at Altium?
Yeah, sure. So been with Altium 15 years, thereabouts. Over the course of that time, started as a salesperson, which is, I tell this story often. It was interesting. Didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I wanted a software job. I was in the semiconductor business prior to that. And at that time, the move to offshoring of manufacturing was really in full speed. And so I looked for a job in software, and my background was in the semiconductor business with FPGA, specifically Xilinx. And in those days, Altium was pursuing an FPGA strategy, which we've since stopped doing that and focused really on our core of PCB design. So it made perfect sense. Sat down at my desk, made the first couple of phone calls, and was promptly met with Altium who. So it really is an interesting arc over that 15 years to go from that, and then having been involved in really almost every facet of the business since, to really now being in this dominant position. It's really excellent. And currently I'm the Vice President of Corporate Marketing.
Yeah, so you've really grown up with the company, quite literally.
I had long hair when I started with Altium, and now I have no hair, Judy. That's a true story, and you've seen these photos, so.
I have. Well, we're between Altium Live events. We just concluded San Diego as of this recording, and you and I both take off on Friday.
I had more hair before Altium Live San Diego, actually,
well, this is a wig.
Yeah.
So we take off for Frankfurt to do it all over again at the end of this week. But I wanted to get you in so you can share with our audience really some of the exciting things. We gave a sneak peek of Altium Designer 20 and also a little bit of Altium 365 and Concord Pro. So I thought the audience would appreciate hearing from you, since, you know, not everyone can attend. So why don't we start with really trends in the industry and perhaps maybe why we're making some of the decisions we're making around our products based on the prevailing trends of the time.
Sure. So I tell this story often when I moved out of the design world and into the semiconductor business. So I just did design work briefly. My aspirations were always engineering, and from a very young age. My father was an engineer. But he was always in the business end of things. And I remember him always telling me that no matter what you do, be an engineer, and then you can be whatever you want. And he was always sort of a life of the party kind of guy. And as you do, you look up to your father. So those were always my aspirations. So I did design work briefly, but it was for an audio company here locally. We made power amplifiers for the audiophile market space. I think really expensive, overpriced power amplifiers for people that spend $50,000, $100,000 on 2-channel audio.
Wow.
Yeah. And anyhow, we would spend a year, if not a little bit more, designing a power amplifier, if you can imagine.
No.
And yeah. And you know, pretty boutique-y stuff. But then, as I said, I always wanted to be in business. I got the job in the semiconductor business. I was 25 years old, and you know, walked in. He said, "There's your cubicle, there's a phone, and there's a phone book. You know, have a nice day. Good luck." But I remember vividly being told by I had a mentor, and he said, "Well, look, don't plan on making any money for 2 years." And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, two things. First of all, the average design cycle is 2 years. And 90% of the things that you engage with your customers, quite frankly, will never be manufactured. And that was 20 years ago. Now, if we fast forward to today, I don't recall off the top of my head the exact statistic, but over half the customers of ours are doing more than 10 printed circuit board designs in a year. And from memory, it was in the neighborhood of 40% were doing greater than 25 printed circuit board designs in a year. So, just this extreme pressure of speed, and we've really seen that accelerate after the 2008 financial collapse with the rise of the Internet of Things, which I know sounds cliche, but it's a real thing. There's a huge majority of our customers are involved in that in some way. And the pressure to meet these really extreme release dates is a significant one.
Right. So what is that doing in your mind? What is that doing to the users of Altium Designers? And obviously we know that's an incredible time crunch. But what sort of things, you and I've talked about that a lot of designers want to design and make stuff, right?
Yep.
But they get caught up in the weeds of the day-to-day
Well, absolutely, Judy. And so that first sort of trend, I don't think is a trend. I sort of look at that as the Moore's law of electronic product development. You're always trying to do more in less time.
Right.
But it becomes compoundedly more difficult when you couple to that this concept of what I call the rise of the all-purpose engineer. Okay.
Yes.
So as complexities have also increased, so packaging's gotten smaller, densities have gotten greater, data rates do nothing but increase. What it's forced is now the majority of our customers are electrical engineers. So we surveyed our customers. Only 14% of them said they had a title of PCB designer. The rest of them all had some sort of engineering title.
Well, it's real easy to look at surveys and
Sure.
go, well, how accurate
Well,
is that? But at Altium Live, you
Exactly.
asked how many people in this room are electrical engineers, and it was stunning.
It was right on, yeah. Yeah, it was
to
almost...
see the number of hands go up.
It was the plurality,
Right.
for sure. It was
was.
probably 75%,
Yeah,
just from a visual.
right.
So what that's forced is the engineers now to absorb or take over this PCB design responsibility. So there's basically another job function.
Right.
It's also forced the PCB design specialists to become engineers in their own right when we talk about the complexities and the data rates that we're now looking at. I mean, we see customers doing 40 gig, 28 gig routinely now. I tell this one often. I've seen customers developing vacuum cleaners that have DDR2 memory on it, if you can believe that.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. But in addition to that, they're having to absorb far more than just the technical aspects. When I was in the semiconductor business, as I said, I was selling Xilinx primarily, so they were keen to speak to me. And again, 2-year design cycle, Moore's law. They were keen to speak because they wanted to design with the components that weren't available yet. So they were absolutely keen to have me come in and talk to them about our roadmaps and all that sort of thing. But as a salesperson, you'd of course want to talk about, well, how are you powering that? What are how about a digital to analog converter? Those sorts of popcorn devices that surround these very expensive large FPGAs. And overwhelmingly, they weren't really keen on having that conversation. They'd say, it's not interesting, or it's not my job, you should go talk to my buyer.
Right.
Well, that is absolutely changed. And now the engineers
has.
and PCB designers are absolutely tasked with that responsibility as well. Documenting the design. There's no document control anymore, really. You just don't see these departmental things happening. It really is now landing on the desks and benches, if you were, on the engineers and PCB designers.
It is. It's an awful lot. So now BOMs, system down design, they're touching software, hardware.
Yeah, on the BOM specifically, look, engineers used to be tasked with creating a parts list.
Right.
And now, that would then be passed to a purchasing department or an individual, and they would create that to be something manufacturable, right? It has pricing on it, it has supplier information, that sort of thing. But now the engineers and designers are absolutely tasked with delivering a manufacturable bill of materials, not just a parts list. So that's a great example.
Right. So swiveling towards our upcoming release of Altium Designer 20, what are some things we're doing, relative to these trends, to sort of ease that burden or to make it more pleasant, specifically around the user experience, right? And how they actually engage with our tool and what kind of enhancements?
Well, so first of all, having been here for 15 years and going through that arc of Altium who, and then you have to have this sort of uncomfortable conversation of, well, have you ever heard of ProTel? They'd say no. You say, well, have you ever heard of PCAD? And then I've heard of PCAD. That's an interesting story for a different day, Judy. But now 15 years later, Altium is clearly the number one professionally used printed circuit board design product in the market space today. And that's evidenced by more than 8,000 new customers came to Altium last year alone, our fiscal year, which ended in June.
It's just a crazy number to me when you realize that other companies in this space are selling in the hundreds.
Yeah. New customers,
New customers.
Yeah. No, it is amazing. And so with that, we're now clearly in this spot where, as number one, we have more to lose than we do to gain at this point.
Right.
And this is where this trend of the user imperative, this is my word, and I'm a marketing person, of course, so forgive me.
You come up with good words. I like your words.
But we definitely, it is imperative on us to then engage in the customers. Engage, as I said, our marketing some months ago, 18, 24 months ago, as you know, Judy, we pivoted very hard in developing these content experiences that we could attract our users and potential users and go to where our users and potential users are. And with that, we're now in the process of aligning the entire organization around that strategy. And with that, we've been very diligent in pursuing these new customers, but we got to make sure we don't leave our existing users behind.
Right.
And a great example of that is in version 18, which we released, it's now 2 years. We're going to release 20 here in a month or so. We developed a new user interface. And if you look at it, it's beautiful. It is stunning. And if you just look at it compared to anything else in the market space, there, in my opinion, there's just no comparison. It really is night and day. But there were some of our power users that I would say politely let us know that we changed some things they didn't like. And a great example of that specifically is the properties panel. So it's a subtle thing, but it's a great example of something we changed. The users raised their hands and said, we don't like it. And so in Altium Designer 20, you're going to see a refactored properties panel that absolutely should make everybody happy that's a power user of Altium Designer. In fact, just as evidence to that, longtime beta customer, I met with him at Altium Live last week, he actually had stayed on version 17, Altium Designer 17. And through the beta process, he was exposed to this new properties panel, and his response was, that panel alone now allows me to make the move into Altium Designer 20. So it's it's a subtle thing, but I think it speaks volumes about us putting our money where our mouth is when we talk about...
And listening.
Yeah, and listening. And being user-centric.
I remember when we changed that, not just the properties panel, but going to the dark background and not giving the option, and then we had to bring the option back. But I mean, you think about it, if you're anything you do, if all of a sudden everyone rearranged all your buttons, it's irritating. Yeah. For any software,
Yeah, right? It's funny you say that. There was another gentleman that came up to me at Altium Live, and he's like, hey, it's a great show, Lawrence, appreciate everything you do. And he says, but quit hiding the cheese. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he actually, this is before the keynote, and he brought up that properties panel. I said, well, you'll be happy to know that the cheese is front and center. You'll be able to find it. So he was quite pleased to hear that.
Yeah, that's funny. So something you spoke about, which I haven't heard you talk about in some time, but I'm glad you sort of brought it back in the conversation, was to talk about the unified design model. So can you share that?
Sure.
And for those who may have not been familiar with that term in the past, sort of give us a sketch of that.
So this is something I remember. I was a young person. I was 32 or so, and then president of Altium. We were talking about, and this is in those days when it was Altium Who, and she called me up and we just had a chat around, well, what's unique about, how can we position Altium Designer? And she asked me, well, how do you position it, Lawrence? And I said, well, it's simple. I say it's concept to manufacture in the context of a singular user experience. And she liked that very much. And then we came up with this term, unified design. And it was very deliberate in that unified, obviously, one.
Right.
It's one thing. And that was front and center in our marketing and the way we spoke to customers about the products for many years. And it was obviously successful. But we backed away from it. Not in principle. The product is still very much a unified product. But from a marketing perspective and the way we educate our salespeople to talk to the customers, we did back away from it for a couple of reasons. I think that as a marketing person, you always look for something new to say.
Right.
That's number one. And the second piece of it is our competitors appropriated it.
As they do.
As they do. And
often.
Yeah. Which is, it's the most sincere form of flattery.
Right.
But quite frankly, look, when we talk to customers and we, new people that are new to Altium Designer, we ask them why they made the move.
Right.
And that's usually the first thing they say. Well, it's just singular environment. It's very easy to understand, use, and so look, we're taking that back. I'm not going to let them have it anymore. And when I say, for the most part, the competitors that appropriated that message, quite frankly, it's unified in name only.
Right.
And so with Altium Designer 20, yes, we're going to start talking about unified design some more because that's our thing. But we're also making some enhancements to that general experience. So specifically, we're adding some dynamicism, if that's even a word, to the environment. And so what we used to have with all previous versions of Altium Designer was this concept of compilation, which is really a software term. But when you place things into the schematic, over some period of time, an engineer or designer would then sort of compile the design.
Right.
And that would instantiate the logic and connecting it to the physical domain, those sorts of things. In Altium Designer 20, again, subtle thing, but it really speaks to where we are now with this spit and polish, fit and finish of the product. That's dynamic. So you place something into the design, it's dynamically, automatically compiled and available to you in the properties panel and all those sorts of things. So subtle, but overall an enhanced experience for our users.
Right. Well, and there's just something something I've really come to appreciate is that other not having been a designer, knowing how clunky that could be to have this sort of modular thing where you're going in and out of the environment to do certain things, and I've really come to appreciate that you don't have to do that. And one of the cool things I think about Altium Designer and our products is that we code them from scratch. We didn't just acquire them in and then piece them together like patchwork, right? Well,
and look, so yes and no. So some of the elements of Altium Designer we absolutely did acquire. However, what we did with those acquisitions is really where the difference maker is. Okay. Whereas, look, we acquired 6 or 7 companies after our IPO, and that was the purpose of the IPO, was to obviously generate some investment capital. And then we went off and acquired, one of the companies we acquired was PCAT, or Excel Technologies. The distinct difference, however, Judy, is that instead of buying those properties or buying those products and then maintaining those as separate products, we took the essence of those products, the kernel of those technologies, and folded those into Altium Designer.
Right.
Well, we unified them, Judy.
What's the difference in your mind between integration and unified?
Well, I think just the word itself implies what the difference is. Uni meaning one. And this is something we've talked about for many years. Integrated suite, I mean, anybody can take a collection of products, put some tape around it and hand you a bunch of boxes taped together and say, here's a integrated suite.
So we're more like the Borg.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
The collective.
Yeah, sure.
About a year ago, Ted Pawella was here with doing a podcast with me, and he talked about sort of this 3-release arc
Yep.
between 18, 19, and 20.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about bringing in more and more high speed, and also to move towards sort of industry transformation, so we could more integrate the manufacturing pieces of that. So where are we? Here we are on Altium Designer 20. So where do you see us sort of in this arc and the direction of the tool?
Right. So this arc started clearly with Altium Designer 18. So a big piece to this process was finally making the move to 64-bit, which absolutely was well received. Cleaning up, again, changing the user interface, not always well received by the users, as we discussed, although we seem to be in a very, very good spot now. So the 64-bit thing was the first step along the way. Now, subtly in version 19 that we showed last year at Altium Live, the ooh and ah moment from stage when we presented Altium 19 was the new layer stack manager, and specifically the materials library and the field solver technology that was included in there. And we didn't make a big deal of it, but that solver technology came via a relationship that we engaged in with Symbian, which is field solving technology.
Right.
So we had, you could calculate these delays, but you really couldn't do anything with them coming out of 19. Now in version 20, this third piece to the trilogy, we now include tune for delay. And that tune for delay is powered using those parameters in your layer stack manager and using the field solver that's embedded in Altium Designer. Other things we added, for me, Altium Designer 20, the star of the show, is absolutely the interactive routing.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is, well, you were there, right? This is
at Altium Live, people a couple times broke into spontaneous applause, which was really great. So,
well, the reality is, look,
received.
this is, in my opinion, where the real creative expression happens, right? And if you look at what these guys do, and you go to San Diego PCB, I'll never forget this. I took Alex, who used to work here as a copywriter. He left to go get his master's degree, as you know. But before that, I took him to San Diego PCB, a local service bureau. And I purposefully said, you should come, because he was new to the business, and I was explaining the sort of persona of our customers. And we were going down there, I think, for a user event, a user group. And I think you actually went with us, Judy. Neither here nor there. I threw Alex in the car with me, drove him down there, and we go to the offices. He looks around, and there's framed printouts of their designs. He says, why are their boards framed and hanging on the wall? And I said, well, because it's art. And it was at that moment he goes, oh my goodness, it really kind of is. So this, for me, is, I think, where our customers derive a lot of satisfaction in the things they do. It's also where they spend a huge amount of their time, is using that interactive router. So in Altium Designer 20, for me, it really is the star of the show. And what we've added is really taking the world's #1 printed circuit board design product and now putting a pretty good amount of separation between everybody else and us. And as you said, this is where we showed the sliding features, which is a subtle thing, but if it's something that you do possibly thousands of times a day, you're going to be very pleased. The new differential pair capability, in just the elegance and the fit and finish of how that works is absolutely enhanced. I'm trying to think of what I might, the any angle routing.
Oh yeah, right.
So, as I said, we see people designing 2840 gig, very dense packaging. And the example we show is an escape route. And so we show the before, which is not a bad experience. It was absolutely effective.
Right.
But, quite a few mouse clicks, probably going to have a bit of cleanup afterwards.
Yep.
Now with this new any angle routing, you can route any angle as it implies.
Not just 45s and 90s.
Not just 45s and 90s. So the example we show is literally a very fluid, almost like a pen stroke escaping from this very dense BGA package. That one got a lot of
oohs and ahs, yeah.
Oohs and ahs and applause on that one as well. So really with interactive routing, what you're trying to find is striking this balance between the right amount of automation while still enabling the user to put their artistic, creative flair on it.
Right.
And I believe that what we have now is peerless.
I've noticed that designers have this acute sense of space, how they use space and all that. So would you say it's more about the art, or it's the way they like things visually organized? Or is it both?
I don't know. It's interesting. And I suffer from this as well.
I watch you straighten papers on your desk all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's just part of the compulsion, right? It's just the compulsion of being a designer, being an engineer. And that's why if you look at like schematics, the schematic tool, whether it's ours or anybody's, is a drawing tool.
Right.
Right. And these guys and gals that create these schematics, I mean, you've seen them. It's works of art.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be.
No.
As long as if it shows you the connections, that's really all it needs to be.
But they like it to be ordered in a certain
Exactly.
way. I've seen our friend Mike Creedon do it too, straightening just things on the desk, because he has such this acute sense of symmetry and space usage.
Exactly.
So it is art on one hand, but it's also related to this sense of space.
It's a compulsion. I'm convinced of it, and I'm not saying that in any way in a negative way.
Yeah.
It permeates everything in my life. The
Just
things I build at home, just as you said, you've seen me move papers and my phone and the way I stack my wallet and the keys. And I think that is I don't know how much of it is inbuilt, probably a fair amount of it.
Right.
And then you throw on top of that it just benefits you to be that way in a design capacity.
Right.
And that's really what we're looking to get at with these new interactive routing features in Altium, is how do we enhance that experience such that it's very functional and it gives the desired result, but also it's enjoyable for the user.
Right. The reason I asked is some old school PCB designers don't like that term being art. It just depends on the person.
Sure.
So that's the reason I asked what your perspective was on it, because I've heard people balk at art or embrace that idea. And it's just one of those funny things about designers.
You can call it whatever you want. I think that when it's executed well, and I'm saying a logical design or a physical design, I don't think you'd get anybody pushing back saying that it wasn't beautiful. Right. When it's done well.
No, I love those framed pictures inside San Diego PCB. I love looking at them. Yeah. And I go up close to see, and they're so dense that it's amazing they can fit all that stuff in there. Well, there's some other, so those are sort of the stars of the show.
Yeah, it's definitely interactive routing is where the most significant impact's going to be to the user experience.
Okay. So there's, a handful of lesser things, but things that will also, I think, lend to a pleasant and, efficient design experience. So what are some of the other things that
So there's a couple of things I would say that set us up for future development work. One thing where we haven't done a lot to the schematic side, speaking of the drawing tool on the schematic side, we haven't done much there in many years. In Altium Designer 20, the schematic editor is now going to be supported by DirectX. So what that does is really two things. Immediate thing you'll notice is if you have a very large, dense schematic, that it'll just be a lot smoother. It'll be silkier and smoother. So when you're panning and zooming and those sorts of things, will be an enhanced experience. But that really sets us up for future things that are coming down the road, which segues into the new Spice engine that we've added. So another area where we haven't done a lot, and we did get some feedback from the customers that they wanted to use the Spice simulation, but we had a difficult time in accepting all the models that are now available. So there's a new engine. So the immediate notice will be that all the models you can throw at it should work. But look for more developments on that to come. We added some enhancements to another area where we're leading the industry, and that's multi-board design. So the Active BOM feature now supports all of the boards in a multi-board project.
Nice.
So you can look at it cohesively. 3D PDF support has been enhanced. We added some library migration capability, which makes it easier for people to move to Concord Pro.
Okay.
As well as, what else did we add? I know I'm missing something.
I think something, not MCAD, but something.
Yep. So we added this ability to place components on the mechanical CAD side.
Okay.
Which
there we
is, and then push them through the mechanical collaboration stuff that's in Concord Pro back into the PCB side of things.
And also, I think a new creepage.
Oh, that's right. If you're doing high voltage design, that's right. I neglected that one. It's interesting. That one's, I seemingly keep sort of neglecting to mention that one. But the first person I spoke to, a real customer I spoke to, he was here last week. And he came into my office and said, well, hey, what are you working on for Altium Designer 20? And I said, well, we got this creepage thing. He's like, I'm a high voltage designer. So there's some new creepage rules. Crossover rules, feedback rules, those sorts of things. Return path, not feedback, return path rules, that sort of stuff.
Right.
So just, fit and finish, polish, but the real new things are going to be in the interactive routing.
It seems like every release we do, there's some people that come out of the woodwork and said, stop adding features, just fix my bug.
Yeah, sure.
We've talked about this briefly before, but as we move towards really listening more intently and responding to user input, where are we with all the bug fixing and all of that?
So a couple of things, and I know we've talked about on this podcast before. So we've never neglected bug fixing.
I know. I call it the urban myth.
Well, look, my feeling is this: perception is reality. Right. So whomever the individual is that perceives that their bugs aren't being addressed, then that's the reality of it.
Right.
So what we have not done a great job of is closing the loop with those that participate.
Agree. Right.
And that's an area where you will begin to see a significant enhancement, and that's in this direct engagement in our forums, on the Bug Crunch itself, on the Ideas Forum, just in general on our digital properties. And that is a mandate that's coming directly from the CEO himself. And typically when he throws a mandate down, it typically gets addressed. So that's number one. Number two is if you look at the bug fixing that's happening in Altium Designer 20, we're addressing twice as many bugs as we did the previous version. And that version, believe it or not, addressed nearly twice as many as the previous version. So in Altium Designer 20, the official number I had going into Altium Live was 108 discrete bugs that are being crunched, as we say. But I have it on good authority. In other words, I know that it could possibly land closer to 120 individual bugs. And those were absolutely prioritized using voting via the bug crunch. And that's really where the chart, I think, is most interesting. And maybe we can put it up for the viewers.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That shows the number of number of unique users impacted by the bug fixing this year. Also relative to the number of votes that were collected on
Right.
Bug Crunch. And then, of course, just the discrete number of bugs that were crunched. So, look, there's no way I could sit here and say that the bug fixing is a done and dusted topic.
Right.
For me, this is something that we're absolutely looking to embrace. And if you look at Altium Designer 20, it's not the big flash release, although I think it's
The routing,
it's
I
a
would
game
say,
changer
is, yeah.
when you consider the things we enhanced. But it's not, it's not a new user interface. It's not this, big
Right.
lift. It really is. We really tried to put our focus into areas where our customers have said, these are areas we would like to see enhancements. And the feedback we got last week at Altium Live, I think, for me, made me feel pretty good about the direction we're taking with Altium Designer 20.
I would agree.
The feedback
with
was
you there.
quite positive.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really helpful, and I'm glad to let our listeners and watchers get a peek inside.
Sure.
Do we want to talk about 365 here?
I came away from Altium Live because we did that media lunch, and I know I mentioned it multiple times, but we had PCB designers, we had some of our beta users there, we had media from the printed circuit board design industry, we had manufacturing people there, and if you just go around the table and say, okay, well, what is it that's frustrating for in your industry, and all of the frustrations were basically identical. And all of them can be addressed with 365. Right. So for me, this concept of, well, we can't do cloud and we're resistive to cloud, it's ridiculous to me. It's 2019.
It's 2019, unless it's military.
Well, and as I said,
that's a different thing.
Well,
and
as I said from the stage, look, we'll happily sell you a Concorde Pro and you can run it on premise. We're not saying you shouldn't do that.
Right.
But what we are saying is, why wouldn't you use the power of the cloud? I mean, you saw what we did at Altium Live. I mean, that wasn't fake. We had people in Europe, we had people on stage, and we went from soup to nuts, literally a blank schematic sheet to a finished product. Now, it was a simple product, but nonetheless, you could have built that product and sold it in the market space.
Right.
That's just kind of where I'm at with it.
Right.
I mean, you tell me you can't, you don't have a connection to your manufacturer. You tell me you have supply chain woes. You tell me that, you're having difficulty collaborating. How do you not take advantage of this gift that is the internet?
I mean, the whole world's on the cloud now, as you know. I mean, here in our office, we use Google Suite. We're so collaborative and we're so fast because of it.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's,
exactly. Look, it's very analogous, Judy. Look, we have people in Kiev, we have people in St. Petersburg, we have people in Australia, we have people all collaborating on these marketing campaigns that we work on.
In real time.
And we get it done.
Yeah, we get it done. Yeah.
So I just don't know what everybody's resistive for at this point. That's my opinion. That's the way I'm going to position it with anybody that asks me.
Well, the users drive this train, and they're going to be the ones that tell us and give us the feedback.
I didn't get the same feedback this year that I got last year. Unless you have a different, I was sort of sequestered away. But the people I spoke to, none of them had any real aversion to it.
No.
And again, we're not forcing you to make this, midstream on everything you do. It's not an all or nothing proposition.
Right.
But geez, I mean, just the ability, your email and your files are somewhere anyway. It just seems to me to be able to have a dynamic file that you can just share with somebody and they can go and always have access to the latest version of it. There's value in that.
I know. People are just worried about IP, and I think that things that are sensitive to IP, there will be workaround. I mean, not workarounds, but they'll keep their stuff on site or they'll keep their IP protected. But for the rest of the world,
for the majority
of us, I think it just makes perfect sense. So, well, thanks for hopping in today. I know it's a busy week for everyone here, especially you.
Here we go again.
Yeah. But thanks so much for taking the time. I know that our listeners appreciate sort of hearing it from the
horse's mouth,
right, of what's really going on and what's behind it.
Yeah, look, anytime, Judy, I don't shy away from any microphone. And that, even in the yellow chairs, anytime.
Okay, thanks so much, Lawrence. Well, to our listeners, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed all Lawrence had to share relative to Altium Designer 20 that's coming out soon. So keep your eyes and ears open. Please remember to like, subscribe, give us some comments. If you want Lawrence to come back and talk about something else, just let us know in the comments.
Or if you don't want me to come back, don't let us know that.
We look forward to being with you next time. Until then, remember to always stay on track.